morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today is the last of our four-part webinar series that's celebrating National Disability Awareness Month. These webinars were being hosted in collaboration with the American Job Center, the Business Engagement Divisions, and Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services, all which are divisions of Iowa Workforce Development. National Disability Awareness Month, and we call that NDEAM, is an opportunity to celebrate the contributions of people with disabilities to America's workplaces and economy. This year's theme is Access for All and focuses on the commitment to create an inclusive and accessible workplace that empowers individuals with disabilities. Molly Wubker, founder and owner of Uncurbed, works as a consultant to the Greater Plains ADA Center in her role as the ADA liaison. Since receiving her Doctor of Occupational Therapy from Creighton University in 2010, Molly has worked in a variety of settings across the lifespan, all while taking a special interest in accessibility. Over the years, her perspective and role in accessibility has broadened. Initially, she followed a reactive design or a medical approach, focusing on matching clients with the suitable adaptive equipment, assistive technologies, accommodations, or environmental modifications. But gradually, she began to embrace a more proactive design or preventative care approach, most commonly recognized as the universal and inclusive design. Today, Molly's experience in co-designing accessible solutions include cross-disciplinary collaboration with industrial designers, architectural engineers, landscape architects, interior designers, user experience designers, and community organizations with the goal of improving access to and participation in a meaningful human experiences. In addition to her clinical and service work, Molly is experienced in delivering content locally and nationally to students and professionals on human factors, universal design, co-design, assistive technology, community mobility, and accessibility standards. And with that, I'm glad to present Molly. So Molly, thank you so much for being here today. The stage is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for that introduction as well. I'm excited to be here and talking to you all today about accessible job postings. So really kind of emphasizing that Title I employment under the ADA and how can we make our job postings more accessible for people with disabilities. So we already got a pretty good introduction of myself already, so I won't go too much more in depth. But ultimately, the lens that I tend to kind of use when I'm thinking about accessibility is I like to think about whatever that occupation that person is doing. So in the context of today's presentation, it would be applying for a job or searching or seeking a job. I like to think about that employees or potential candidates' journey. And so kind of making sure that we're looking at all of the touch points as well as the pain points that they might experience when looking to apply for a job. And so then as the employer, recognizing, what those potential touch points, pain points could be in that person's kind of ecosystem, and making sure that we address those things. And so when I think about job posts, we're going to be talking about things not only just online, but also offline as well, and be providing some additional resources for everyone to go to. But first off, I want to just kind of provide a brief orientation on why accessible job posts matter. And so with that, you want to think about making that first impression, right? And accessible job posts are just that. They're really the first impression that an employer is going to be making. And so you want to make sure that they're feeling welcomed from the get-go, and really providing that communication, effective communication, as per ADA, on what is your culture within your or organization that really promotes inclusivity, and really will help attract that diverse talent pool. I think an important statistic that I like to always share is the employment rate for Americans with disabilities. In 2021 is when it actually was conducted, the survey was 19.1% compared to the 63.7% of those without disabilities. So just kind of looking at that gap in employment for individuals with disabilities, and in comparison to those without disabilities, and that there's still a very significant gap. And then another, I think, important statistic to keep in mind is that a larger share of people with disabilities are self-employed than those with no disability. So 8.4% versus 5.9%. And that difference largely comes to the challenges that people with disabilities face when seeking employment. And that ultimately they end up needing to kind of go the entrepreneur route and create their own business just to simply, make money and bring in that fund to cover all of their expenses. And so one way to look at this is that when we're not creating an inclusive hiring process, or we're not creating accessible job posts, we are driving away this very talented pool that's going to go and end up creating their own business potentially, and potentially increasing the competitive market. They could end up being a competitor. And so and because of the unique skills that they can bring, that can be ultimately a challenge. So why not instead bring them in and utilize their talents within your own workforce? So since we're talking about employment, what are the titles under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, that really kind of shape what we're required to do? And that's Title I, like I mentioned earlier, employment. And then also Title II, local and state governments. And so the implications for that are that employers, they must ensure that their hiring process from the job postings, so again, looking at that journey to employment, provide equal employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities. So this includes adhering to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so WCAG, because a lot of our job postings are online. So then because they're online, because they're on the web, we need to make sure that they're accessible in that way. As well as then following inclusive hiring practices and providing reasonable accommodations. And so in talking about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, these, if you're not familiar with them already, they were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C for short. And they offer 3 levels of accessibility, A, double A, and triple A, which basically is good, better, and best. And so for the Title II right now, because the DOJ recently came out with an update to Title II entities regarding needing to make sure that all of their web content, digital content, is accessible. And the definitive standard for those Title II entities are WCAG 2.1 Level 2A. So just kind of knowing that there's different criteria standards based off of the level, but double A is kind of considered better than A, and then triple A is the best. So what are kind of the challenges that people with disabilities have actually expressed when it comes to the hiring process? And this actually comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this isn't a comprehensive list by any means, but in direct context to job postings. One, it's inaccessible job descriptions. So meaning that perhaps the platform that's being used to access those job descriptions isn't accessible. Because a lot of times when we are posting jobs, we're posting them on our own websites, but they also get posted on external platforms, whether it's, Indeed or LinkedIn. And we want to, make sure that those also are going to adhere to the WCAG 2.1 level 2A standards. Also things like poorly designed interviews and just simply discriminatory practices, just not feeling welcoming. And that can even start, again, from the language that we use in that accessible job posting. So let's kind of talk about some of the myths versus the realities that exist, again, within this context of the training today. So the myth of, we'd have to lower our standards to hire individuals with disabilities. And obviously this myth is suggesting that accommodating disabilities means compromising on quality or expectations, when the reality is that there's actually been research coming out now that hiring people with disabilities can lead to higher performance and higher productivity. Because people with disabilities, they have these kind of unique problem-solving skills and perspectives, and that can lead to higher performance. It can lead to innovation. And companies that really cultivate that inclusive culture experience have shown a 20% higher annual revenue on average due to that innovation and that kind of broadening of their market reach. And so it's an important thing to remember that there is no lowering of standards when hiring individuals with disabilities. Another myth is that people with disabilities will miss work too much. And this belief implies, obviously, that disabilities inherently lead to more frequent absences. When actually research says that there's better attendance rates. So contrary to those myths, employees with disabilities often demonstrate equal or higher levels of attendance. And this is particularly true in workplaces that offer the right accommodations and foster an inclusive work culture. So there's a balance that we need to achieve in being able to enhance that attendance rate, but ultimately kind of dispelling that myth altogether that people with disabilities will miss work too much. And then a third myth is that we can't afford to make accommodations. And so there's this perception that making accommodations incurs prohibitive costs for the employer. When in reality, and this actually came out from the Job Accommodations Network, or JAN, that in a study that they conducted, accommodations are low cost and high impact. So most accommodations, they either cost nothing or are relatively inexpensive. I think that they said most employers, maybe the average would be $500 that they would end up paying, for an accommodation. So relatively low in the grand scheme of things. And so, for instance, adjustments like flexible work hours or minor modifications to software or workstations, those can make a really significant difference without any of those major expenses. And then additionally, offering accommodations can reduce turnover rates. And we know that when those turnover rates happen, then there's increased costs in having to go through the hiring process and the training process again. So ultimately, you can save them companies' recruitment and those training costs in the long run. And so with that, I wanted to play a little bit a video real quick. It's a little over 2 minutes, but just to kind of get in the spirit, I guess, of accessible hiring and when we include people with disabilities, how that could inspire innovation to happen. And so I want to play this video really quick.
Christopher Hills, quadriplegic.
Are you guys able to see that? Hold on, you might not be able to.
We can see it and we were able to hear it.
Okay,
So,
great. Perfect.
yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to start it. Here we go.
A birth accident left him profoundly disabled with cerebral palsy. From his wheelchair, he will now express to you how he feels about his disability.
Molly, real quick.
Yep.
The video we actually see a person in a blue shirt with an iPad, and so it doesn't look like it's playing from our side here. Like it's just got that, it still shows that little play button.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. I think it's just I have to share, I have to stop and share a different screen. So hold on one second while I do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Now I can see it, Molly.
Thank you. Here we go. Round 2.
Christopher Hills, quadriplegic since a birth accident left him profoundly disabled with cerebral palsy. From his wheelchair, he will now express to you how he feels about his disability.
Christopher uses a head switch to access switch control, which is Apple's accessibility feature built into all Macs and iOS devices. With this, he has access to online university studies in video production. He has gained Apple's certification in Final Cut Pro 10 and now runs his own video editing business. He has done work for people all around the world. He has recently completed a promotional video for the Clinical Skills Development Service at Queensland Health. Switch control makes it simpler for people with all levels of ability to use their computers and devices. Christopher and Canadian physicist Ross Lockwood are collaborating on the development of a prototype system using switch control to enable astronauts to access iOS devices from a bulky spacesuit.
I recruited a friend named Christopher Hills who helped me develop a new type of interface using some of the accessibility options in iOS and on the iPad. With the idea of using switch control as an interface for an astronaut controlling the computer inside of their spacesuit, I've invented a switch control interface that looks like a glove.
Ross's genius for invention and Christopher's mastery of switch access, combined with Apple's accessible operating systems, make this exciting innovation popular.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to the presentation. So bear with me. All right. So can you see the presentation again?
Yes.
I lost my mouse. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just wanted to provide that video of again, kind of going back to why accessible job posting matter, because you're increasing, that diverse talent pool and all of the amazing things that they can do. And it's kind of that video kind of highlighted an example of universal design, because that is a tool, that glove that could potentially be beneficial for people with disabilities, and that was the original intent. That ended up having a benefit for astronauts, apparently. So just kind of cool, all the things that can happen, when we collaborate with people with disabilities. Okay, so now we're going to jump into how do we make accessible job postings online. And so there's, as you can see, kind of a long list here that we're going to go through, and a lot of those are going to target things that directly are from criteria, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so we'll kind of start with that, but we'll talk through why those are important. So the big thing is when we are creating accessible job posting, we want to be really provide a descriptive title for that job posting, because once we kind of put it out online, that we want to make sure that we can increase the search engine optimization. Because before a person can even, and this goes for people with disabilities or without, before a person can even, find or start to apply or read an accessible job posting, they're gonna do a search for it first. So we need to make sure that their search is also accessible, and we do that by having descriptive job titles in there. So instead of just having a job title that says career opening or just has your business name, career opening, it should be something like career opening and what is the actual job title itself, salesperson. So that's only going to increase that search engine optimization, so that when they go in online and they want to search up salesperson, your job posting is going to find them. A lot easier had you just left it as career opening for that organization. And that goes the same for if you have, if it's posted on your website, and you maybe have a separate, a Word document or a PDF document that is attached or saved to it, making sure that those have descriptive titles along with it are just going to enhance that search optimization. So yes, so again, just really making sure that we're being considerate on how do we save, our documents, or how are we titling our web pages, so that we can increase that search engine optimization. The next is posting on accessible platforms. And I kind of alluded to this earlier when I talked about Indeed and LinkedIn, but just making sure that, we are using job posting platforms and website builders that are known to adhering to WCAG 2.1 level AA standards. And I did a little bit of that work for you. And I did a deep dive into what are some of those accessible platforms that already exist out there that adhere to level 2A standards. And LinkedIn is one of them. Indeed, Workday, Handshake, Disability Solutions, and Even Break. Those were some of the top ones that were included in terms of adhering to WCAG 2.1 level 2A standards. That doesn't mean that some of these others aren't striving to achieve that standard, but according to at least their website and according to their accessibility statement, they weren't quite at that level yet. But I think we will probably see that needle moving in that direction more and more. But just wanted to let you know kind of what are those accessible platforms already. So keyboard navigation. So ensuring that any content that you are making is fully navigable via a keyboard. So this is really, in considering your website, if you have a web page that's devoted to your career openings, and so you're posting things on there, you want to make sure that an individual or user with a disability is able to navigate that web page and really your website in general using keyboard navigation. So a lot of individuals with disabilities, they might not be able to use a mouse. And so instead they might rely on the certain keys within their operating system. And so there are keyboard shortcuts that they use, and I put those on there. And those are just kind of simple tests that even you as an employer or the employer themselves could use to just kind of do an easy check of, is my web page, are the career opening section, are they navigable using a keyboard? So if I tab is basically the different functional elements within my web page, do they highlight? You should be able to kind of see that it moving along kind of your headers and your menu and your main navigation sections within your web page. And so there's just a really easy way that you can test that using your keyboard kind of shortcuts that are on the screen. So again, just wanting to make sure that individual disabilities are able to actually navigate your career openings page where you're going to potentially host this job posting. Descriptive links. And this is also, again, I would say similar to having descriptive titles, because again, it can increase your search engine optimization and really get out to that diverse talent pool more. But avoiding things like just click here or learn more, or putting the entire URL and hyperlinking it is going to make it more challenging for individuals with disabilities when navigating your web page. And again, this is their first impression. So if they see, oh, you know, they took effort in really providing description so I know exactly if I were to click on this link and I were to go and want to learn more about their accessibility statement, like the example on the right of this PowerPoint, that this is where it's going to take me. It's going to take me to it's the accessibility statement of this company, and it's going to take me to maybe, and it's an external link if they're accessing this from LinkedIn or Indeed or a job platform software. So or, you know, instead, if it was already on your web page, so this is the career openings web page on the employer's website, you probably wouldn't need to take or include that additional text external link. It could just be accessibility statement. But adding kind of additional kind of destination cues, making sure that you're telling them exactly what they're going to go to and read about, those are really, really helpful, especially for individuals who are blind or have low vision. And really just kind of helps kind of paint a picture for them in their brain of ultimately what the content's going to be about. And then when you think about your job posting, now you're writing your job posting and ensuring that you're using simple and just clear language, avoiding kind of the jargon, those complex sentence structures, and any unnecessary technical terms. And this can really be beneficial for people with cognitive disabilities and even those with limited English proficiency. There's kind of one nice way, because now, you know, we're living in a world where we have AI, and one perhaps way to use ChatGPT, you know, in a positive way is by writing your job post and then plugging it into ChatGPT and putting a prompt. Write this job post at an 8th grade reading level, because 8th grade to 9th grade is kind of what's recommended to kind of achieve that plain language level. And so then it will translate whatever you wrote and put it in an 8th grade reading level for you. So then you can simply copy paste and put that in your web page, put it in a Word document, whatever it might be. There's also extensions that you can add, like Grammarly. I have Grammarly on my computer and I love it, where it can help you, gives you insights on what your reading level is in real time as well, rather than having to go outside to ChatGPT. So there's different kind of AI applications that you can use. Also, if you're in Microsoft, you're writing this in a Microsoft Word document, Microsoft Word has a built-in editor where if you go to tools, you go to spelling and grammar, and then you click on editor, and then you click on insights. So there's several steps. But then it will give you the Flesch Kincaid grade level. So again, it will tell you, you know, is this a 10th grade reading level? Is this 11th or 12th grade reading level? So it does give you some insights there as well. Effective formatting. So, and this is general information, whether we're talking about your career opening webpage, or we're talking about your website in general. Just effective formatting is really helpful. Having very organized and structured content. And what that means is utilizing proper heading hierarchy. So making sure that your headers are labeled via code. So and when I say via code, what that means is that it's not visible to the sighted person. We're not going to see this, but it's going to be labeled on the back end. Some of the code, what it might look like is H1 for heading 1 or H2 for heading 2. And what that ultimately does is it tells a person who uses a screen reader, so someone who may be blind or have low vision, or even people with cognitive disabilities, what is important, and what kind of is this topic about. So that should be labeled as heading, and then having kind of the normal text underneath that. But just having it labeled. Also, when we're using the keyboard navigation, labels really help because it helps them kind of jump to different headers as well. So it just makes it more accessible. It would make your career openings page more accessible. If you're doing this then in a Word or Google Docs, Word has a heading styles pane that you can click on, and then you can label your headers that way. But there's kind of an example on this screen, and how how using headers would appear visually, and then how it ultimately appears to a screen reader. So just showing that that's ultimately what the screen reader is reading to them. And so and to us, when we look at it, it might look like a lot, but it just shows that when we can add those little changes by including headers, it can really make a huge difference to making a job posting more accessible, and really just making a web page more accessible. Alt text, I added this in here just in case, just because you might not have a lot of pictures on that career page, and maybe those pictures might be more decorative in nature. But let's say you do have your logo and things like that. Those might be important things to convey the meaning of and the context of in an image, and just wanting you to kind of recognize the importance of that, and then how to add that alt text in what ways. So you could do it, in the visible body of the text near the image. So within your web page, within your Word document, you could do it within the markup. And so markup is just a different word for code, essentially. So this would be not viewable to the sighted person, but it would be essentially listened to by a screen reader. Or it could be presented on a separate page if you have an accessible Word version that you're using to describe those images. And all of those are acceptable within WCAG standards. If there is text in the image, so a lot of times when we look at logos, they'll have kind of the logo, and they maybe would then have a tagline or their mission statement or whatever it might be. You want to also include that text in that alt text, in that image description, because images are not readable by screen readers. Only their alt text is. And so the person who is blind or has low vision isn't going to be able to read that text unless it's put into alt text or image description. So I did add, just even in Microsoft Word, that kind of the pathway or the channel that you can use to add alt text. And ultimately you would select an image, you would choose picture format, and then there's an alt text button, and there's a description field where then you can add a description. You want to be really careful to not select that generate alt text for me, or if you do, just make sure that it is matching the description of the image, because there's a lot of times, more often than not, where it really does not convey the context in which you're wanting that information to be conveyed. And then of course, there's also a button that you can mark as decorative. So if the picture is not adding anything to that accessible job posting, then you can just mark it as decorative. And so here's just kind of an alt text example. how would you describe this object and its context to someone who is blind or who has low vision? So just wanting to include the subject in detail. And when we say in detail, that can kind of vary on the user. There's a lot of users, that don't need to know that the shark is blue. They just want to know that it's a shark. The setting, if there is a setting, any actions or interactions, or any other relevant information. So this could be something as simple as shark with sound waves and the text Jaws. That could be the image, that could be the alt text or image description. Because ultimately there's within the context, there's not much more that we need to know about this image. Color contrast is another thing. So if you are, using different colors, a lot of times I'll see web pages in general, they'll kind of use different colors to kind of emphasize certain things or highlight certain things. You just want to be mindful that if you're doing that, that you are meeting color contrast ratio under WCAG, which is 4.5 to 1. There is a really neat color contrast analyzer. It's called TPGI that you can download for free, and it works basically over any of your software systems. And you can determine, whether that foreground versus the background ratio meets color contrast guidelines. So if we were to use the TPGI, that pure red with white, that would not meet color contrast guidelines. That would be just slightly under it. And so although, we might be able to see it, or some people can, who have very good acuity, it still would not meet the WCAG standards. Pure green with white also does not meet WCAG standards. That pure blue with white, it does meet the standards. Of course, there are times where having larger text versus smaller text, those character spacing, all of that can also increase the readability of font, and we'll get to that soon. And soon as in now. And so when we talk about readable fonts, another big thing in your accessible job posting, using sans serif fonts is what's recommended. It's not required. Ultimately, what WCAG requires is just readable fonts, but sans serif has been considered kind of best practice for fonts. And there's a lot of different sans serif. It's a family of fonts. So there's a lot of different kinds that exist out there. But when we can avoid any stylized or decorative fonts, avoid as much as possible italicized or bold or underlining, we can increase, the readability of that font. It doesn't mean that we can't bold. It doesn't mean we can't italicize. It doesn't mean we can't underline, but we just want to be using it sparingly. And I do say, especially when it comes to underlining, because underlining is typically associated with descriptive links, like we talked about earlier. And so those hyperlinked texts where it takes you to some other external link, a PDF or whatever it might be. And so if we underline things, that person might think that that is a link, that it's going to take them somewhere, when really there is no function to it. It's just the word. So when we can use it sparingly, or using it simply just for links, or bookmarks, that kind of thing, we can kind of reduce any sort of confusion that might come up. The recommended minimum font size for body of text is 12 point, especially if we're talking about Microsoft Word, and then 24 point or larger for headings. And then when font size is below that minimum, we just want to adjust the character spacing and length to kind of accommodate for that. When we have lists, so a lot of times with job postings, you might have certain candidate requirements, things that you want, them. What are essentially those essential functions? What are the skills that you want them to have for employability? And those are typically going to be in lists. And so if we're doing lists, you want to make sure that you're actually using those bullet features. You're not just putting a hyphen and then typing the word, because when we do that, then it can be very confusing for that screen reader, and just makes it more inaccessible. If you are creating a list for any reason that should be listed by number, so maybe it includes steps within that job application for applying for the job. And you want to make sure that they understand that there's kind of an order to those steps for applying. Then you want to make sure instead of bullets that you're using numbers, because that is, there are priorities that need to happen in place of each other. So just making sure that we're using kind of those bullets and we're using those numbers when appropriate. So inclusive language, and obviously this can go online, but it also can go offline, and it can, whether it's a physical job posting or it's even just, someone's calling to talk to human resources about the job, and being sure that we're training human resources on inclusive language. And so inclusive language examples on here that I provided, obviously not a comprehensive list, but just some of the do's, saying things like salesperson, server, or chair versus being gender specific. So salesman, waitress, or chairman. Person with a disability versus handicapped. So person first language is something that's used a lot within kind of the different models of disability. Proficiency in English communication skills required, rather than saying native English speaker preferred. Must be able to travel between multiple locations for client appointments, versus saying must be able to drive between multiple client appointments. So that difference between travel and drive can just be more inclusive, because we're not saying that it has to be that they're driving. If they have other means and can meet the requirements, then that's okay. Must be able to communicate with others effectively, where instead of saying must have strong written and oral communication, if they have other means, alternative means of communication, and they can be effective in that way, then that is more inclusive language. Ability to remain at workstation for long periods of time versus must be able to stand for long periods of time. So is it really important that that person is standing at this workstation, or is it just more important, excuse me, I'm trying to get this off the screen real quick, more important, that they remain at the workstation? Must be able to respond quickly and effectively to directions and safety hazards, versus saying must be able to see hazards and hear directions in a hectic environment. So if they have other ways of discerning or identifying that there are hazards or directions, and can use other senses, or there's accommodations that could potentially be offered, versus relying specifically on, the senses of seeing and hearing. Also your accessibility statement. So including the accessibility statement, in my opinion, is really huge. And I would say that in a job posting, I think all job postings should have an accessibility statement, or they should have a link to the organization's accessibility statement. So that it could include kind of a brief accessibility statement that's inviting candidates to request accommodations, for this job, and then maybe a link to that website's accessibility statement. And so when we talk about, well, what should all be in that accessibility statement, you would maybe want to include the WCAG conformance level. So, does this company strive to meet WCAG 2.1 level 2A? Because that's going to show that person with a disability that they're striving, to meet what is considered the definitive standard for the ADA. Having that reasonable accommodation statement, so making them recognize that, that it's safe for them to request accommodations. Even talking about, and I think that sometimes organizations could do a better job about sharing all of the things that they're already doing in regards to inclusivity. There's a lot of organizations that have employee resource groups, whether it's for people with disabilities or other ethnicities, whatever it might be, and really highlighting that is something that this organization offers, and doing that in the accessibility statement can be really helpful. Also describing the workplace environment and the culture, right into, the accessibility statement. So, if it is a kind of a fast-paced kind of culture there, making sure that they're aware of that. And that can be something that's embedded into the accessibility statement. If there are opportunities for maybe they would be working in cubicle types of settings or have their own office. Anything that you can kind of do to describe that physical environment as well as just the culture within the accessibility statement can be really beneficial. Workplace flexibility. So showing them, what is the potential flexibility that could exist, whether it's flexible scheduling, whether it's remote work, whether there's rotational assignments, whether there's paid time off, just different types of potential flexibility that could exist, and adding that in your accessibility statement. All of this will give them a really good picture when they're looking at the job posting of, is this a place that I would want to apply to? So jumping forward, because a lot of times job postings will also include application forms. And so when we have application forms, there are some things that we want to check for. So again, going back to keyboard accessibility, wanting to make sure that all of those form controls are keyboard accessible, that we can tab to them, that every form control has a label, and that labels are positioned correctly. So having, let's say if you're requesting an email address, that the email address is left of the text box or any drop-down lists. And then if you have any sort of radio buttons or check boxes, that you have those check boxes or radio buttons are right of the actual text. And so I added in here an example of a voluntary self-identification. Do you identify as a person with a disability? Please select one option below. Yes, no, I choose not to disclose. I know a lot of times in applications and things, and from the ADA, we talk about how you should not ask if a person has a disability or not. But sometimes because of federal contracts, employers might want to kind of gather that information. So it's important that it's voluntary, and that it's something that that person can choose whether they want to do or not. And then if you are offering that checkbox or those radio buttons are accessible. Also, just that fields are not indicated through color alone. So again, what that means essentially is when you're tabbing, we want a way for that user to know where they are on that job posting. And so whether it's highlighting something, highlighting the form to say, yes, you are on the radio button, yes, right now. You are on the radio button, no. You want to be able to, not only just through color, but other means show that they are where they are in that particular job posting. You want to make sure that if there's any instructions, again, for applying, that they're in logical order, and that if they are having to submit right there, and there ends up being any errors in that submission, that those errors are findable. When possible, using application forms that don't erase if there's an error. We're making that person start over again, especially for a person with motor disabilities and cognitive disabilities, that could be a challenge. So anytime where you can kind of save kind of as they're going, and just kind of go directly to the area that there's maybe missing information. All of those can be little things that can make a huge difference for a person with a disability. And honestly, it's universally beneficial in my opinion, because a lot of people would benefit from not having to redo their form. The other important thing is, again, when we're online, making sure that we're testing for accessibility, and that includes any of our job postings. So whether that's through automated means, manual, or user testing, ultimately all three of those are considered best practice when done together. So automated is used essentially to complete an automated test. It's can be an aid to a manual test, or it could be even used for simulation of the user experience. The important thing when it comes to automated tools that exist out there is they should never replace manual testing. And the reason for that is because accuracy of automated tools, they range from 20 to 50%. So they're not necessarily getting all of the potential errors that might exist on that job posting page or the web page in general. I did include a link here, an external link to web accessibility evaluation tools that exist out there. There are tools that are automated tools that can help for web pages. There are automated tools that can help for different applications or software. There are automated tools that can help for Word or PDF. So they kind of have some different uses, but it's a huge database. So wanted to share that resource as well. When talking about manual testing, the importance of this is it can allow for a deeper understanding of that user experience. What is truly their experience, all the way from what are the feelings that get invoked when they're on this job posting. And so that oftentimes can be done with user testing, and inviting people with disabilities to, review the web pages, review even career page. All of that can be really helpful. And just making sure that that's kind of embedded into your evaluation or your quality improvement processes is testing for accessibility, because then that's ultimately going to hopefully be generalized to the career pages on your website. The other thing is making sure that we have alternative formats. So, offering job postings in multiple formats, whether it's plain text, having it in a PDF, your HTML, Word, as well as maybe having an audio kind of attached to that job posting or examples. Audio is not necessarily required. That's a AAA WCAG standard, but it definitely could show, a workplace going above and beyond. But just, offering those different formats can be really helpful depending on, who's applying. If you were to create any flyers and post them online, so let's say social media or whatever that might be, there are definitely some do's and don'ts there as well in regards to accessible job postings. So you do want to download a Word or PowerPoint file to check accessibility. So PowerPoint maybe wouldn't necessarily be relevant here unless you had some additional guiding documents that you had attached to the job posting platform. But what that means basically is before you put a flyer into a PDF form, it's always important that you download it in Word or PowerPoint, because PowerPoint and Word have, and Office in general, has a built-in accessibility review system that can essentially make, when you're then saving it as a PDF, make it a lot easier in terms of making sure that that PDF is then accessible. When we go straight to PDF, let's say from Canva or wherever we're building it from, it can make that PDF very inaccessible. And so anytime I'm working on anything in Canva, I usually always then go to Word or download a PowerPoint of it, make it accessible there before then maybe saving it as a PDF. Also providing a transcript of the entire flyer, as sometimes flyers will get saved as an image. And if you remember when I said earlier about logos, The text in an image, those are not readable by a screen reader. So everything in that flyer, if it's saved as an image, is not going to be readable by a screen reader. So providing a transcript of that entire flyer, so a separate page essentially, would be helpful. Providing a URL when also providing a QR code. So just making sure that, and QR code is a great idea to include that, but also making sure that we have that URL, because a lot of people might be searching for jobs on their phone versus on their computer. And so they might not be able to use the QR code, and instead the URL would be more relevant. But that can oftentimes be forgotten about. Also, flattening, if you have any graphics again in that flyer, flattening those graphics before importing them into your flyer. And ultimately kind of what that means is that, especially because Canva, you can kind of build graphics and you can do different things, and it has multiple layers. But what that does when we save it in a different format is each of those layers are considered an image, and that it's going to request or ask for an alt text for all of those layers. So flattening those graphics or grouping those graphics in advance are just going to make it more simple later on when you have to add alt text or mark it as decorative. It will save time ultimately. And then also including a link to download Google Translate. That's just more of an inclusive approach, recognizing the intersectionality, of candidates, and just kind of offering that additional kind of download information can be just show that you're trying to be as inclusive as possible. And then saving in accessible formats, like I mentioned, saving files in the appropriate file format is really important to retain those accessibility features. So PowerPoint and Word doc. And then when you have those saved, making sure that you're then saving the files as an accessible PDF. And when I say saving it as an accessible PDF, rather than using the export feature, you want to make sure that you're either doing select file and save as a PDF, or sometimes there'll be the Acrobat tab on the toolbar and create PDF. That's also okay. But export, if you have made any accessibility changes in a Word document and you go to export it to a PDF, it will not retain those accessibility features. So you need to do file save as, or you do the Acrobat tab and create PDF. And then Adobe PDF, you want to obviously start with an accessible source file. So that's what I mean when I talk about starting with Word or PowerPoint and trying to make it accessible there, because it's only going to reduce the amount of accessibility changes we have to make in the PDF. And that can be very challenging. That would be a whole separate training. And there is actually just a link that I provided. Iowa State University did a grant, and they created this really neat training on how to make Adobe Acrobat documents accessible. And so that's just something that's out there. If anyone works with PDFs a lot, that might be something that's beneficial. Now just jumping to offline, talking about task analysis, skills for employability, those physical job postings, and human resource training. So we're going to kind of be going a little bit more upstream. So thinking again about those touch points before you even get to writing your accessible job post, we want to make sure that we truly are writing on that job post what are the essential versus the marginal functions that are required. And that oftentimes can be determined through a task analysis. And so factors to consider when determining essential functions that you would then go and list on an accessible job post are the amount of time dedicated to the task, the degree of skill that's required, the impact of reassigning the task. So these are all things that you're thinking about. Is this an essential function? Employer judgment of task importance, the frequency of the task, the amount of time it takes to perform the task. So you're basically going to be thinking about, here's the job, here are all the tasks that I want them to complete, that I would maybe put in a job posting, but I want to do a task analysis to make sure that these are essential. And so these are the factors that I'm going to consider to determine that.
Molly,
Oh, yes, go ahead.
can I interrupt really quick?
Of course.
So I think this information is so amazing, and it looks like you've got some more to go through.
Sure.
Which is fine. So those who want to stay on, it's great. If you'd like to stay on, I can listen to Molly forever, so I understand. But we did have one question I just wanted to make sure. Would we be able to get the slides so we can send out
Yep.
to those that registered?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
I can send that. Yep.
So those participants who are on, we will go ahead and send the slides as well as the recording after it's done. So just kind of letting you guys know that. And we'll keep moving. Thanks, Molly. Sorry.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so just continuing on with that task analysis, it's important to note that meeting a single criterion may not be sufficient to determine whether the task is essential. So for example, a marketing professional might frequently stuff envelopes for mass mailings. However, the task could be easily reassigned to an administrative support professional. So although, the frequency, they might be doing it a lot, but is it something that someone else could do or be reassigned if that person, let's say with a disability, requests that type of accommodation, or it's noted that the reasonable accommodation process should be considered or triggered. Another example is a program manager might be responsible for developing a departmental budget once every year. The task is infrequent, but requires a specific skill set and would be very cumbersome to reassign to another employee. So just kind of showing the difference between the frequency and the importance. And how even though, again, there's the department budget, it's a pretty important task. So it should be listed as essential and isn't something that maybe could be accommodated through reassignment. The other important thing here is skills for employability. So in that term or in general can be really helpful just to kind of use in the job posting itself is skills for employability over saying something like standardized minimum, over saying something such as like having specific degrees or years of experience. So essentially what I mean by that is it's often true that job specific skills, those are things that can be taught on the job, whereas other skills cannot. And some of those other skills are interpersonal skills, systems thinking, critical thinking, teamwork, problem solving, innovation, time management. And those are a lot of things that people with disabilities are really, really good at, because they've had to be problem solvers. They've had to manage their time because it might take them longer to do things. So they had to be very considerate and thoughtful of those things. They've had to be collaborative with other people and work on social skills and interpersonal skills and things like that. So those are things that aren't teachable oftentimes. And so, those might be things to really highlight on that job posting. And rather than maybe focusing on whether that person has a specific degree or years of experience. So just kind of an important differentiator to consider for job postings. When it comes to physical job postings, so now maybe you've had it online, but you're wanting to have physical job postings, whether you're printing them out, flyers, and posting them around. And so just even being cognizant of simple things like where you're placing them. So height recommendations, remembering that for ADA under Title III, the 2010 Standards for Accessible Design, reach range is between 15 to 48 inches from the ground. And so making sure that we're putting those job postings that are within reach range or, your visual line of sight Because a lot of times I'll see you know, whether you're in a gas station or a library, and they might have those bulletin boards, but they're typically not in line of sight or not within reach range. So just being cognizant of that. You know, adding those QR codes on there can be an accessibility feature that will link them to perhaps accessible digital versions that they can then use with a screen reader. And then also even being considerate of the locations that you're posting your jobs at. So community centers and nonprofits, library job boards, inclusive job fairs, and workforce development agencies. So just really being mindful of going to, you know, where individuals with disabilities, you know, might spend their time. And then the other important thing is human resource training. So just making sure that, again, if a person with disability, they've read the job posting, and they might have some additional questions. So we want to make sure that if they're then calling, let's say, human resources, that human resources is reflecting that inclusivity that is on that job posting. So having, you know, trainings on bias and inclusive language, and, you know, having them be very familiar with reasonable accommodation protocols, and have a specific reasonable accommodation protocol in place. And just being considerate of potential reasonable accommodations, even for a job posting. People could call and say, hey, I need a large print of this job posting. I need a Braille version of this job posting. I need a qualified reader to read this. I need screen magnification tools, which that one most likely people are going to have that themselves on their own operating system. But just being mindful that those are potential requests that people could ask, even when trying to access the job posting themselves. So when we can provide those things in advance, that can actually be more proactive, you know, it could alleviate time in the long run as well. And again, bring more of that diverse talent pool, because they are noticing, wow, you know, they're taking steps, they're being proactive, and making sure that this is accessible to me. All right, so we are at additional resources. So additional resources to kind of consider or look at to kind of expand upon this is the Office of Disability Employment Policy. They have a lot of good information in there as well. The Rick Hansen Foundation has a lot of great information regarding accessible job postings, and obviously the Job Accommodation Network has a lot of great resources and information regarding accessible jobs and accessible job postings as well. So just wanted to provide those links to you. And then kind of lastly, I just put in here that, and when I send this PowerPoint to you, that if you want to make an accessible post on your own social media platforms about this training, and help kind of spread the word to others about simple ways to make a difference when creating accessible job posts. I kind of did the work for you, and I created a post that you can just copy paste and put in there if you want to, and just kind of help us continue to train people, you know, on how to make accessible job postings. And so with that, there's my contact information, as well as Great Plains, which everyone is welcome to contact at any point with any ADA related questions, or if there are more trainings, of course, we're always happy to provide them.